Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking, is technology really making our lives better? Hello and thank you so much for downloading this week's episode of The Green Room. It's a really good topic this week and I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. And as ever, I'm joined by a wonderful host, Lizzie Elston. How's it going, Lizzie? Lizzie?
Sorry, George. What? Sorry, I was just checking my Facebook status. Not enough people have actually liked what I've posted, which is really frustrating. So I'm going to keep an eye on that as we go through.
As ever, Lizzie's stuck on her phone, and not paying attention. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're talking about technology and whether it really makes our lives better. From smarter healthcare to remote working, there's no doubt that technology has had a positive effect on our lives, and one only has to think about all of the positive effects technology has had over the centuries. But there are downsides too. In an always-on connected world, how is that constant connection affecting our mental and physical health? Is it too early to tell? And as our lives are moving online, how can we be sure that businesses are keeping our data secure? So this week's big question is technology really making our lives better? And Lizzie, who have we got with us in the studio to help us out with this?
So in the studio today, we have Paul Lee. Paul is a UK partner and our head of global research for technology, media and telecoms. He works with a range of tech organisations to help them understand consumer behaviour in the industry. Hi, Paul.
Good to be here.
And we're also joined by Libby Cousins. Libby is a UK partner who leads the marketing practice at Deloitte Digital. She specialises in working with media and technology companies. Hi, Libby.
Hi, Lizzie.
I think to kick things off, we've got a bit of an icebreaker.
Do you know, I completely forgot about the icebreaker bucket this week.
Yeah.
Here we go. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Okay, here we go. If you could only keep one app on your smartphone, what would it be? How appropriate.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Who do you want to go to? Paul?
I'll go first. So the app I would keep is Find My, which is basically finding friends, so I can see where my family is. And it just reassures me to know that they are, for example, at the right time of the day, at home. So it's one example of how technology makes me feel better.
So Paul is keeping the app that helps him to stalk his family.
That's the one.
What about you, Libby?
Oh, it is really hard to pick one. I think it would probably be Spotify. Actually, one, I love my music, but two, actually, I think the sort of area of well-being and, sometimes being able to switch off and just being able to pick different genres of music or kind of mindfulness kind of things, and just having that range, just really good for me to just kind of be able to switch off.
Well, yeah, it's I got an app which is an augmented reality, very hungry caterpillar, and my daughter actually goes berserk when this happens. And you sort of you open up the app, and then this the hungry caterpillar, like in the story, will start eating an apple, and then you can drop down little pears and it eats that, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's kind of the little game, really. So I think
is this really for your daughter?
It does make the commute a bit more interesting, I think, as well. But I think if I got rid of that, then I'd be in trouble. So.
Well, I would be in trouble if I didn't have WhatsApp on my phone, because otherwise I wouldn't know, what is happening at school the next day for my son, and it helps with my parents group to keep everything updated. So big shout out to all the school parents out there.
So, Paul and Libby, thank you so much for coming. And this is obviously a massive topic, and technology is so broad. I guess maybe one of the first questions we could ask you is whether you do think that how has technology changed our lives? Why is this an important conversation to have? Perhaps, Paul, you can tackle that one.
Technology does make our lives better, and it's in every way that you can imagine. So technology at its simplest level is any tool that humans create. And for millennia, we've been creating more and more tools to make our life better. At a very fundamental level, we do not go hungry in general because of the technology that goes into food. And even over the last 100 years, there's been a radical change in the way in which we create food in every respect, and it's for better and for worse. But there wouldn't be over 7 billion people in the world right now without technology enhancing the way in which crops are grown, cultivated, etc. And it's quite likely that at least one of us would be working the fields right now without technology. So we are doing these podcasts thanks to the power of technology in so many different ways. So that must be a good thing.
Absolutely. It's so fortunate that the world is able to download this right onto their phones right now, which is great. I mean, Libby, do you agree with that? What's your assessment of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed our lives completely. I'm definitely of the generation that didn't have a mobile phone at school, didn't have one at university. There are pros and cons. That meant that I was pretty much on time to everything because you
had to be.
Weren't able to contact anyone to let them know that you're going to be late. But equally, just that, ability to, if something happens in your journey or you don't know where you're going, to be able to actually quickly get out technology, look at Google Maps or Apple Maps. Don't want to be state any preferences. But, you have the ability to kind of access things that you never could have accessed before. So in terms of, education, for instance, that used to be, I think, potentially more divided, and technology allows access to education to people that wouldn't necessarily be able to travel to a school. If you think about how we can get some of the techniques that work well in one country and actually now share those quite easily with others, and a more global kind of approach to education. Just one, I guess, example of just the ways that actually it really does have the ability to benefit people from different backgrounds in a way that we never would have imagined possible.
I guess there's such a wide range of technology when we're talking about it, as you've suggested. And do you have any thoughts about perhaps what are the most impactful sort of technologies that have come our way that we can't almost imagine being without now?
Well, I guess the iPhone is probably, the biggest thing that actually put data onto and put a computer into a phone that you carry around with you all the time, and being able to access the internet off your phone was something that people didn't even imagine was going to be a necessary thing, and that people would really want it. And, Steve Jobs having that vision that actually, Henry Ford with the car, we'll just make it in black. And then, you create something that, to have that vision that actually it is going to be something that's going to enhance people's lives and they are going to latch onto it. I think that was probably one of the biggest shifts for us in technology and accessibility of technology.
Would you agree, Paul? You've sort of you look at this world every day and have done for a while. But what would you say has been the most impactful technology in recent years?
It's normally the combination of different technologies which enable that. So the smartphone is a fantastic invention. It's a coalescence of lots of different technologies maturing at the right time. So one reason why you could have that particular product was because of advances in glass and the ability to deliver information through the glass that could then be translated into actions. And of course, there's always connectivity, which is underpinning everything. And the way in which we remember how important connectivity is when it disappears. So every now and then there is an outage of, let's say, a day. And that's when you remember just how reliant we've become on connectivity. And it's a bit like a game of Kaplunk. So, you can pull out all these different technologies, and at some time, everything, implodes because you take away that one element of technology. But there are multiple things that we rely on, which is great. And also, I'd say we believe we rely on them. And if we were to go without them for a couple of days, say without a smartphone, we would really quickly adjust because we've lived for centuries without these technologies, and they make our lives better, but they're not fundamental to all our lives in many cases.
I think, that makes sense, actually. I guess you would get over it if you didn't have your smartphone. But having said that, mean, I remember taking my smartphone in to be fixed not that long ago and walking out of the shop without it. And I honestly felt like there was a body part missing. You know, what if there was a problem at school and I had to be contacted? What if there was an emergency? And, you know, that's a real reaction I had, a physical reaction.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you know, I mentioned like my favourite app is like Find My. And it just gives me reassurance because I can stalk, as you were saying. But then if I think, you know, when my parents were parenting me and if I went out, then they'd have no idea where I was. And that was just the norm. But now that we have that capability, and that capability is being augmented because there are apps which allow you to guess what mode of transport that person is using, to listen in on the conversations in the cars when your kids are driving. So you can keep ratcheting it up, and then you can add in video, you know, so it's not at the end just to see a little like dot on a map. This is phase 1, and there's at least 10 phases to go.
But going back to the point you touched on earlier about reliance of these apps and the technology around it, are we too reliant on them, do you say? How easy is it to just cut the cord? I mean, I know people sort of volunteer for digital detoxes and things like that. There's an economy around this a little bit, but at what stage do we become too reliant on this technology?
I'd say we have a hierarchy of needs, and when we are signing up for digital detoxes, our lives are pretty damn good. When we are going to food banks, then that is a more fundamental priority. But there are coaches who can coach you or your kids on how to use digital devices. There are lots of tools available on phones by default which allow you to control your usage, which hardly anybody ever uses. I mean, we do a survey every single year asking, do you ever use your phone? For the last 3 years, it's been 40% rigidly have said they ever use their phone. Of those, hardly anybody does anything about it. So there's 8% who say they use a sort of time management app, the default one. They're available for free. They're relatively easy to use, and people don't use them. So I sometimes wonder, is smartphone overuse the addiction that we can sign up to, that we can admit? Because there are plenty of other addictions you can have, which I would argue probably are far more pernicious. And when I look at the studies which are out there, so the view is you can't look at a phone before you go to bed because of the white light. But I've looked at some more recent studies, like big studies from the University of Oxford with 30,000 respondents controlled. They go, we cannot see any evidence of a significant impact on well-being, for example, amongst teens. So as a researcher, which study am I going to refer to? It will be whichever looks most robust. And I've looked back at some of the other studies saying, from big institutions which say, technology is bad, we believe. The sample is often 100 and not a representative sample. And I cannot believe that because it's just too small.
Libby, do you agree? What's the relationship between technology and well-being in your eyes?
I think there obviously is a relationship, but I think to things like Paul's just talked about, that study, I think sometimes also just thinking that actually it's probably more likely that if you're on your smartphone, you are active right up until the point that you go to sleep. And so you have no time to switch off and for your kind of brain to slowly shut down so that you actually get a good night's sleep. And that's probably more likely to be the reason for any sleep challenges than white or blue light. And some people are more sensitive than others and prefer the kind of reduced light. But, I kind of completely with you that at the moment, kind of the research it's not robust enough to be able to say that there is definitely, that the technology itself is the thing that's sort of bad for your health. I think the addiction to being on and doing something on your phone constantly, not being able to put it down and just sit and watch TV with your family,
or have a conversation,
or you're sitting right next to each other and you're both on your mobile devices and reading something. I don't know, me and my husband will turn to me and be like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, just playing a game, actually. But then equally, I'll ask him. So, what are what are you reading? I can see it on the on a sort of newspaper kind of media app, like reading articles. I'm like, oh, what are you reading? Like, be nice to have a conversation about what you're reading rather than you just reading it and me having to get my gadget out and read the same article so that I know what you're talking about.
Perhaps you should just sit down and listen to the Green Room podcast together. Yeah, it's really interesting that we're talking about technology and well-being here. We've actually partnered with Somerset House for their current exhibition, which runs until February, I think. It's called 24/7, and it's all about balancing well-being with a digital world. And actually, earlier this week, we went to speak to Sarah Cook, who's the curator, to find out more about it. Here's what she said.
So the exhibition 24/7 at Somerset House looks at our non-stop world, and it addresses how artists could be a good way to understand the kind of relentless information overload that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And the artist's works kind of present a very playful and immersive take on this subject. It's a subject that everybody can relate to. Sleeplessness is a very common problem, and 24/7 reflects on this.
So Sarah was there talking about the problem of sleeplessness, and Libby obviously said earlier that perhaps it's not the technology itself, but it's this mental stimulation of perhaps whatever you're reading, which is contributing to it. And this issue that, you know, when we're physically together, we still find ourselves sort of distracted by it. How big is this issue of technology sort of disconnecting us from the real world or the outside world?
I think if we just go to the topic of sleeplessness, and that's often associated with smartphones. Now, sleeplessness existed as a condition prior to 12, 13 years ago, before they emerged. They existed 20 years ago, 100 years ago. And what we often forget is a lot of these elements that we talk about have existed for millennia. And we've always found new things to blame for them. So I remember when we used to worry a lot about video games, and we used to worry a lot about television. And now what I find quite ironic is, if you want to spend time together, you do television. But you go back 30 years and it was television is evil. Why don't you read books? You go back 50 or 60 years and reading books was regarded as a bad thing. It was corrosive for the brain. So is it perhaps a human trait to blame anything that's new for conditions that are probably innate with us and have existed as long as we have?
It makes me feel a bit better, actually, when I think about, my son watching too much TV or playing on the iPad.
No, I think you're right. If I kind of look at myself, then I definitely think I spend too much time on my gadget. But before that, I was still kind of either working reasonably hard, or when I was at university, kind of working fairly hard, but spent a lot of time watching TV. And again, you still weren't necessarily having that social interaction that we keep saying that all of this technology is responsible for us losing social interactions. When in actual fact, it's probably sort of more innate things in our kind of history and in our upbringings as to why we either avoid social interaction or choose, for some reason not to engage in with people in a certain way. Or, we were talking the other day about my Candy Crush habit, and how actually for me just completely being able to switch off from work and just zone out all of the stresses of the day and play a really mind-numbingly
absolutely
boring game. Challenge was that is it becomes quite addictive, but that's no different to computer games or
playing the piano
or
cooking
or
mowing the lawn.
Board
it's
games.
All a similar thing. It addresses a similar need, which is to disconnect.
Yeah.
And just playing devil's advocate here, Paul, I think we can all agree that technology is great. We've seen fantastic benefits in healthcare and just the way we live our lives today. But I think it's about the pace of change, which is a bit of a problem for people. It's either a bit too scary, too daunting to keep up with it. And I think, specifically about older generations, my granny definitely hasn't kept up with anything which is more recent than 1962. But can I just challenge you on that point? How can we help those who have maybe been left behind by technology?
I've got an idea.
Yeah.
So what I think is for one thing, we need a lot more public programming about technology. I think it's a real shame that we don't have an equivalent of Tomorrow's World.
I used to love Tomorrow's World.
Yeah, so that's a big gap for Sundays at 8 p.m s or 9 p.m s.
And you're free, aren't you, Paul, to do this?
I can make the space. And I think that would be a great way to explain how technology is not daunting. So it's a bit like, kids get scared of maths, adults get scared of maths. But when you actually show them how simple it is and how relevant it is, they go, actually, it wasn't too hard. So sending a message via a phone is not that hard to do. Attaching an image to it is a little bit harder, but there's a reward to it. And I think something that society needs to provide, and it happens in some markets, is the ability to teach people everywhere how to use technology which is useful for them. And if I look around the UK, so lots of public libraries, they offer digital skills training. What is that? How to create PowerPoint decks, how to use Word. Why isn't it how to use your phone to buy a train ticket whilst you're at home, and then how to use that train ticket in the new gates that they've got? Why don't we have that rather than teaching people how to format a Word document? Not that there's anything wrong with Word documents, but we need to be teaching relevant skills. And you could also have a program whereby you can get kids who tend to be more confident about using technology, pairing up with someone who is in their over 60s, doesn't have to be a relative, but just going, this is how you can use your technology. And then we'll get a lot of satisfaction about making their lives a little bit better, because that never goes away. And technology can be a medium to recreate some kinds of communities. And in some markets, what you've got is you've got facilities, say, for the retired, and people come in to those groups, those social centres, and they teach them how to use technology. So Spain is one area where that happens, and you have really, really high smartphone usage. You have people who are adept at WhatsApp, and they're in their 90s, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case.
Absolutely. I suppose there's also a bit of a trust issue as well, isn't there? And I'm sure we'll come to the whole thing around data. But it's possible that sort of people of my parents' generation, for example, wouldn't want to do online banking and transfer money because of the fear that something's going to happen and it's going to get hacked. Whereas writing a cheque, it's much more sort of simple and physical, and you can hold it and tangible, and there's no risk. Whereas I would always be transferring online. So there's that sort of element, isn't there, to the generational culture. And what about technology in the workplace and this always-on culture? So we have work emails on our phones which can stay with us 24 hours a day. I was reading that, in fact, in some country, I think it's in France, that they have banned work emails after a certain time, or they've put some legislation in anyway. And I think there's been some research done in the UK as well as to whether that's a good idea to stop the whole being able to see your work emails after a certain time. But then the research is suggesting that could actually have a negative impact on one's health. What are your views of that?
I think I read some of the kind of UK research, and it kind of resonated with me that actually, as much as sometimes it is a bit much to be able to see that my work emails are coming up, sometimes my day kind of needs to shift, and therefore people dictating to me when I do work and when I deal with things would be more stressful to me than me being able to access and decide for myself. And I think some of it is about having a bit of your own taking responsibility for yourself about how you interact with that. It is possible to to put the sort of do not disturb on earlier to make sure that you don't get all of the notifications pinging up, that you choose when to go into the app and look at your emails. So there's some self-discipline that I think some of us are not good enough at, and I count myself in that, absolutely. But there are moments where I catch myself and I'm like, You do not need to do this. You know that there is nothing critical. Put it down, spend some time with your husband, go and see your friends, just let it go.
Yes.
And it's really, really hard. But,
Absolutely.
But there's a bit of just self-discipline about it, I think, sometimes.
Yep.
And actually, just to add to that, I think, Paul, your mobile consumer survey found that 88% of people use their phones at work for personal reasons. And then of those, a quarter were admitted that they were distracted by them. So, is this an example of technology making us less productive?
I think there's a range of mindsets when it comes to productivity. And we work in a kind of a seam of people who enjoy being overly productive. So we get stimulated by having bulging inboxes, by cramming in as many meetings as possible into a day, by parceling our hours into 15-minute segments so we can have more interactions. And part of that can be physical interactions, part of it can be emails. I don't think we are the majority. And in one sector, for example, in retail, a lot of people are just not allowed to have smartphones. So this idea of a 24/7 work culture driven by technology overlooks a large proportion of the population which doesn't have technology, partly because they're not allowed to, partly because they're just not even offered it. So there's lots of parts of the UK workforce where there is no digital revolution yet. It's massively inefficient. It's paper-based. And there's lots of errors which creep in because there isn't enough technology there. So I think it's important not to represent the UK workforce based upon our own trends. And I would expect the majority of people in the UK spend probably more time being distracted by their devices in the workplace than the people who distract their home lives with their work activities.
I think that's really fair. I think we should just start worrying when it's the paramedics and the doctors are sort of looking at their phone and not listening to you, or when the surgeon is too busy on Facebook or something. But
so there's obviously a lot now in the news about data. It's some say it's sort of fueling the digital economy, but there's obviously real concern around keeping it secure, and we've all heard in the news about issues that arise from that. How can we be sure that our data is secure?
Well, I mean, it's tough to ever be able to provide people with absolute assurances. But I think, from a lot of the big tech companies, they are taking it very seriously now. We're seeing quite a lot of focus around security and kind of protection of data. I think there's a personal responsibility to make sure that you share the data that you're comfortable with and that you're kind of happy with, and that you understand how different organisations are using it, rather than just blindly accepting the terms and conditions, actually taking a look at kind of why people are collecting your data and for what purposes. And I think GDPR and other data regulations have meant that a lot of organisations have put easier to opt in and out of kind of regulations on sites and how and what data they can capture. But I think there is a lot of value to being able to utilise that data, and data driving your experiences, the information that you see on websites, being able to make sure that you are, if you've just bought some insurance from a certain provider, you're not targeted by that provider for the same thing that you've already just bought. Just some logical things that actually make your user experience just generally more pleasant.
I think in many cases, there are really good applications of sharing data. So the ability to track health is really powerful. The ability to spot symptoms early on, which is always what we're looking to do, is a lot better when we're sharing data. When you look at, so we're based in a city. The challenge we have at the moment is congestion, mobility, and using lots of data sets from different generators of data will be fantastic for enabling traffic to flow better.
Oh, that's something to look forward to. Excellent.
But I think that is the crux of the argument, really. Data is, when it's misused, that's bad, and people don't like that, and that's when you get all these negative headlines around it. But
that's like with everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So technology is a neutral tool that can be used in any way. Like a hammer can be used positively, or you could lob it, as a weapon. So it's the same with everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there you go. I
we would encourage everyone listening to use the hammer for the right purpose,
DIY
in case anyone was thinking of
only.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, Paul and Libby, thank you so much for coming today and talking to us all about this monumental subject. I think we're fairly in agreement that technology is a net benefit for society, which is good. It is making our lives better. And I promise I'll try and teach my granny to download this podcast and help her out in that sense and make society better in that way.
As long as she doesn't sort of say, I've got it on the computer, but I can't see you.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's probably a good thing. So.
Would you like a final seasonal digital dilemma?
Yes,
absolutely.
Right. So it's coming up to the end of the year, Christmas, gifting season. Technology enables e-commerce.
It does.
Is that net good for society if you think of all the vans clogging up your neighbourhood streets?
I'm going to let you two give your opinion on this, because I have already had a conversation with Paul.
It is an interest. There's been a lot around this already, around actually what's the environmental impact, what's the congestion impact and all the rest of it. But frankly, I am the kind of guy who does do shopping in the 20s of December. So, and when suddenly I do need something on next day delivery, then I will use that customer benefit, really. So, but I'm not sure about you, Lizzie.
Oh, I wish I could say that I, do all my shopping on the high street and don't make sort of the use of ordering online and clogging up the streets, as you say, Paul. But like yourself, George,
But if you drive to the high street, you clog that up as well.
Well, I would walk, obviously.
What I've done, what I've recently done.
Take public transport.
Or take public transport, yes.
Much more
recently in our house, that we have signed up to a veg box service, which is I think there's an app, and you get linked up to a local farm, and they give you a weekly box of veg, no plastic wrapping, and it's much cheaper. So perhaps that there's a little benefit there. I don't know. I'm trying to find the positive spin on this, but
so you get potatoes every week then.
There's an awful lot of cabbage in my kitchen. Yeah. Great. Well, I think now that we're talking about veg boxes and deliveries, I think we should probably end it there. But thank you so much, Paul and Libby, for coming down and helping us today. And just a reminder, you can find all of our previous podcasts on deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts. Tune in, download, listen, and share with your friends. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. Tune in next time for our next big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.